Hi everyone, this is Nick Avloshenko, and in this video I will be teaching you how to create fire from scratch in Cinema 4D using a plugin called TurbulenceFD, and then applying it to your footage of a close-up of an eye. So this is a two-part tutorial where the first part is done in Cinema 4D with the use of TurbulenceFD, where we'll be creating the actual fire. And the second part is in After Effects, where we are going to be color correcting footage, adding fire into the background, making sparks, and obviously adding the fire to the eye. For those who want to skip the Cinema 4D part and just get the footage, if you're a Patreon supporter of my page, I have a link down in the description where you can download the 1920 by 1920 video of the fire that I created and that you learn how to create in the first part of the tutorial. So let's get started. For that, you're going to have to turn around and use the computer. So once you're in Cinema 4D, the first step would be to click on the cube right here and choose a shape of the torus. And we are going to make the ring radius be 150, with the pipe radius being around 11. So this will be the shape of the eye that will be expanding over time. So this will be our final shape. Let's go to frame 60 and keyframe the radius by clicking on the red circle here. And let's go to frame 80, keyframe the rotation. Now you will go back to frame 0 and pull the rotation back to maybe negative 180. And hit the keyframe. And under object, we're going to bring down the radius to about 20 centimeters and keyframe that as well. So now when you hit play, you can see that it expands and rotates. That looks good. Let's save the project. I'm going to call it ring with fire. Perfect. Now it's time to create the actual fire. So for that, you're going to need the TurbulenceFD plugin, and you're going to choose TurbulenceFD container. I will make the container 600 by 600 by 600, and for now I'm going to make the voxel size 10, just so we can quickly preview and see the fire to see if it's making the right movements. And before we start working, I don't want the fire to be going up too fast, so under simulation, in the temperature tab, we will choose buoyancy to just be 2 centimeters instead of 20. That way our fire doesn't go up too fast. And we're also going to create a turbulence field, that way it gets displaced in an interesting pattern and not just be a block. So we're going to choose our turbulence intensity to be 20. With the smallest size being 2 and the largest size being about 10. And by the way, you can play around with all these numbers to really see what they do, but this is what I was using for the final product in the video. So now that we have this selected, we're going to choose a place where we're going to cache our simulation and choose something with a really large amount of space left on it. So if you have a hard drive left with 2 gigabytes, I would suggest finding a bigger drive to save it on, and I would also recommend using a fast drive like an SSD. That way it won't be a bottleneck to your simulation. So I'll make a new folder here, and I'm going to call it fire cache, maybe ring fire cache, and just hit create, and I'll open this folder and I'll make a new cached file, and I will rename it to 10sm for our 10 centimeter voxel size. So that will be my preview, and then I can make a new one for different iterations of voxels so I can really see how they look. So don't forget to save your project often, and let's get started with making our fire. So you're going to click on the torus here, and you're going to right click, go to TurbulenceFD tags, choose the TurbulenceFD emitter, and you're going to set the temperature value to 1, and at 45 frames you're going to keyframe that value because that's when the ring is basically halfway done almost. And we're gonna go to about frame 58 or so, just before it's done hitting its maximum rotation, maximum size, I mean. And we're gonna set the temperature value to 0. So let's save our project. Now I'm going to right click on the torus, go to Cinema 4D tags, and choose compositing. And we're gonna uncheck scene by camera. And what that is gonna do is prevent it from being seen by the camera when you're rendering it, like this. That way you don't have any problems with then trying to figure out why you have a torus showing up in your video. So this is looking pretty good right now. Let's make our scene be 300 seconds. That would be way too long. 300 frames long. Now it's time to go to plugins, TurbulenceFD, simulation window, and I'm gonna hit this little icon here and just drag it into this here, just because we will be using it pretty often. And let's hit start and see how it's gonna look. So once again, this was at voxel size of 10, so the quality is gonna be pretty bad, but we are here to start seeing the motions and what it's gonna start to look like. Great, so let's preview this. So as you can see, it expands and it goes up, and this is kind of the motion that we're looking for. It's looking pretty good. So I'm just gonna hide the torus in my preview window as well, that way you don't see it also. And now it's time to create a new camera, and let's reset these parameters except for the Y axis, because you're gonna need that. So let's change the rotation to be -90, that way the camera is facing down. And 600 is going to be pretty good because the fire does not go over that limit. I'm going to change the render settings to 1920 by 1920. That's what I used. You don't have to use that, but I was doing it just in case if someone will be using it for a really extreme close-up on a 4K video or something, just in case, because I am giving this away, the actual rendered video, for anyone who is a Patreon supporter for my page of $1 or more. So now that we have this fire and we are kind of liking the motion and the way it's looking, and it's dispersing pretty well, and it's looking kind of what I want. So now we can go into TurbulenceFD container, make a new cache, rename it to 5SM for a 5 centimeter voxel size increment, and we're gonna do another quick simulation and see if it's looking exactly how we want it to look. So I'm gonna stop the simulation right here. I'm liking the result. This is exactly what I'm looking for. So now we're gonna make our last one, which is we're gonna hit new, and we're gonna rename it and call it 1SM for 1 centimeter, and this is where the final quality comes out. So this is what you're gonna hit start, and it's gonna start simulating, and it's gonna take the most amount of time with the most amount of space. For me, it took 13 gigabytes to get this 10-second simulation. So I'm gonna hit start and just get a couple of frames going so I can show you the render settings which we are going to use for this setup. And they are really quick and easy to make because this is just a pure fire simulation. There's not much that we're changing for this tutorial. Okay, so I'll stop it right here because this is going to be fine just to see what the render is going to look like. Now it's time to go into the rendering tab, go into the fire shader, and I only changed a couple of values here. I changed the lower temperature to 750, and as you can see, it gets rid of the really dark areas. I changed the high temperature to 210. Oh, sorry, 2100. And that got rid of the super bright overexposed areas. And that was about it. So now you go into the render settings for Cinema 4D. Make sure you have the TurbulenceFD render checked, because you're going to need that. I made it 1920 by 1920. You have to keep the frame rate at 30. Otherwise, you're going to have to go into the TurbulenceFD container and change it there. So in the Save tabs, instead of saving it as TIFFs, I'm going to choose OpenEXR. And I'm going to check the alpha channel, and I will choose a location to save. I'm going to make a new folder and call it ring fire. I will call this fire, ring fire, and hit save. In the output, I'm going to choose all frames, that way it renders the entire sequence, and I'm ready to hit render. So once you're ready, you can just hit render, and it's going to render out a image sequence of every single frame of this fire simulation. So now that all of the settings are done, let's continue. So now that we're done with the Cinema 4D part, let's jump into After Effects and see what we got. So now that we are in After Effects, we are going to throw our footage in here. I am going to find my file with the eye, and that is right here. So I'm going to drag and drop it into the project window, and then I'm going to double click here and go to where I saved my ring fire. I have a pre-rendered one here, and if you downloaded the one I gave you, it will just be one video file that you can just drag and drop. It will not be the entire sequence. And just hit open, make sure open EXR sequence is selected here, and it's going to take all of these images and put them as one video right here. So let's take our footage of me, or in this case it's going to be you. Great picture here, great shot, looks beautiful. Okay, I will bring down the quality to quarter so I can work with it faster and just get to a point where you need it. So I'm gonna have to trim a part of this. So this is good, and then gets to the end here. This should be enough, and now I'm going to bring these in, and you can crop the video by holding Option and end bracket and beginning of bracket to crop your clip. And I'm gonna choose trim comp to work area, and now this is all that we're working with. So the first step is now to take your fire, throw it into a new composition by dragging it in, and you're going to see it right here. So as you can see, the color doesn't exactly look like fire, so we're going to go into effects and presets and start typing EXR or EXTR, and there is a under the 3D channel tab there is extractor, and just drag it onto your file. Then you're going to take the white point and make it 5, and you're going to click on this info box here, and for the alpha channel you're going to choose R, which is taking information from the red channel. So now as you can see, you have a very red fire here. So now let's go back to our original footage, take our project, take our fire comp here, and we're gonna drop it right into the middle of my eye. And I'm just gonna move the time just so we can see what's really going on here. And when it's at its largest size, we're gonna hit T, bring down the opacity to 50, hit S for scale, bring it down, and try to get the size of your eye. So 27 seems pretty good. Make it just a little bit larger because we will be doing a little bit of masking on it. So this looks good. Hit T, bring it back to 100%, and change the mode to screen. So now when we go to full quality, you can see that you're getting some really bright orange color in the eye. Now the only problem now is it stands out like crazy and it does not look realistic. And there's a couple of things with that. One is that it's going over your eye here. So we're going to mask that. You're going to mask the circular part in the middle, and then we're going to start adding glowing effects on top of it as well. So in order to get it to match with the actual eye, we're going to mask it. So make sure your fire layer is selected, go to the pen tool, and click and drag to start making these shapes. So I'm making the outside of the eyelid, and then I'm just going to click around and get it to fill. And right now it's inverted, so under the masks you're going to choose subtract, and then we are going to feather it slightly. So if you click on this icon, you're going to get rid of the visible mask, as you can see. And as you can see, the edge is very sharp. So I'm going to take the feather and make it about 8 because I'm working with 4K footage. And I might have went over just too much, so I'm going to hit it, bring it down slightly, and bring this down slightly as well. Maybe I will actually blur it even more, maybe around 14. That's looking a lot better. And we are going to do the same thing with the top here. You're going to choose the fire layer, get the pen tool, click, and drag to cover up this area. And usually the less points you make, the better. That way you're not getting weird jaggedy edges. And once again, choose subtract, bring it down, and feather it to about 16%. Pixels, I mean. So as you can see, now you're getting a little better result here. Now it's time to mask out the middle of the eye. So for that, I'm going to turn off the fire layer, choose the ellipse tool, make sure my fire layer is still selected even though it is turned off, and then you're going to click in the middle of the black part of your eye, click and drag, and then hold Option, Shift, and Command. And that's going to be centering it and making a perfect circle right in the middle. So once you get the size of the black part, you can let go, and it will make this perfect circular mask. You can make the layer visible. Once again, choose subtract. I'm going to switch to the selection tool and uncheck my masks. And as you can see, it's really sharp. So I'm going to bring it down and start bringing out the feather until it gets to a point where it looks pretty natural and good. So I think 80 is pretty good, and then I'll start bringing the expansion out a little as well, just to make that black part a little wider. I think it needs a little more feathering just to make it blend in slightly, and expand it a little more as well. So once again, there's always just playing around with your footage because everyone's footage is different, but this is looking pretty good. The next step is now to choose fire and double click on the ellipse tool, and what that does is, as you can see, it makes a big sphere, a big circle around the entire thing, and you're going to choose intersect. So now it's taking out everything that's outside of the circle, and you're going to take the expansion and start bringing it in until it starts touching the edges of the eye. As you can see here, now it's getting rid of the edges. So once you get to a pretty good amount, you will start feathering it out. That way it's blending the actual edges of it. There we go. Maybe just slightly more. And maybe minimize that expansion. So now you're getting a nice rounded edge, and the eye is looking a lot better than it did without any masks. So now that we have this eye ready, I will keyframe the mask path for the bottom of the eyelid and the top of the eyelid, and you can also rename the masks by hitting enter and writing bottom and top, and make sure to save your project because you don't know when After Effects is going to crash. So now that you have the shape selected and you have the paths keyframed, you have the starting point of where the frame is perfect. So now what you can do is click on your footage, go to Window, choose Tracker, choose Track Motion, and you're going to get this little tiny square here. And so take the inner box and stretch it out. And what we will be doing now is tracking the actual eye here. So we're going to fit the black part of the eye into the box. It will be a lot harder if your entire eye is completely black. If the entire iris is completely black, or a dark brown color that will match, but you could still probably get away with tracking. So get it into the box here, and that is what it's looking for. So the inner box is it's looking for this dark circle, and the outer box is the motion where it's looking. So if you have an eye that's moving all over the screen really fast, you will need to make this box bigger. But for me, I don't move it too much, so this should be pretty good. So now just hit this back button here, and it will be tracking it frame by frame backwards. So as you can see, we are getting to the part where I am going back into the darkness, and the eye is getting out of focus. So here I can just stop the keys because my eyes won't have the fire in them yet. And I'm just going to scroll forward and continue tracking it forward here. So this should be tracked enough, so we'll stop the tracker here. Now the next thing to do is go to Layer, New, Null Object, and we're going to call it, hit Enter, and call it Left Eye Track. And we're going to hit Edit Target under the Target tab, and you will choose Left Eye Track. Hit OK, Apply, Apply Dimensions X and Y, and just hit OK. So now you have a tracker right on the eye. So let's go back to the frame where it was perfectly aligned over here, and we are going to click this parent icon and bring it to the left eye track. So now when you're playing it backwards and forward, it is now tracked to the eye. And if you need to see the keyframes of the actual track, you can hit U on the keyboard and it will pop out here. So now the key here is to start keyframing the eyelid if it's moving. So if you blink, you'll have to move it up and down. I don't move it too much, but I do make some slight motions. So I will just adjust it accordingly. So now we'll just trim my video, my preview range here, and just play it through to see what it looks like. Perfect. So now you're good to go. So I will skip this eye just for the sake of saving time in the tutorial, but you can imagine it's the exact same thing. So now let's move on to getting the eye to look good. And in order to do that, you're going to zoom out so we can see the colors well here and the rest of the face. And we are going to start matching it. So let's go into Effects and Presets and start typing in levels and bring the levels in. And right next to the quality button here, there is the channel settings. And go in here and choose red. I'm also going to uncheck the masks toggle just so we don't see that. And in the levels tab, we are going to choose red channel. So what you're basically working here now with is just the red channel and seeing just the red channel. So as you can see, there's a lot of bright red area on the face as well as in the eye, but there's also really dark red areas. So I will try to match that pretty well. So I can just take the middle and start moving it around to try to make it match. The way I look at it is if this was a black and white photo, what corrections to using only the red channel here would you make to make it look realistic? So as you can see, the actual dark part of the eye is really dark, and you just see this edge, right? You just see the edge of the actual fire. So you'll just be playing around to try to get them to match pretty well. Now it's time to go into the green channel, and you're going to go into the green channel in the levels tab as well. Then we're going to go into the blue, and there's really nothing blue of the actual eye, so let's go into the RGB and look at our corrections. So this is with the levels and this is without, and as you can see, it kind of matches with what the actual color of the eye is here. So as you can see, it matches a lot better. So now the key is to duplicate this fire, hit T for opacity, make it 60%, and if there was an actual fire in the eye, it would be glowing red hot. Let's go into effects and presets and type in fast blur. There's a lot of other plugins you can use to blur things, but this is just fast and it works. So and start bringing that out. About 158 looks pretty good. You start getting this nice red hot ring around the black part of the eye. As you can see, before it was like that, now it's like this. And duplicate it one more time, hit T and choose 30, and now you're going to bring the blurriness down, and this is the hot accents that you're gonna get on the edges here. So if you keep it at around 30, this should work pretty well. So as you can see, you start getting interesting hot edges here. Yeah, 30 looks pretty good. So as you can see, this is with it off and this is with it on. So now that it's looking pretty good on the eye, now we need to time it, and in order to time it, we are going to go to the beginning where it's blurry. I'm going to go into the actual fire composition, and I'm going to bring the beginning to be right at where my cursor is, and I'm going to right click on it, go into time, and I'm going to do time stretch, and I'm going to make it 50. So it's going to be twice as fast as we had it rendered. So now as you can see, there's no fire, and as I approach the camera and my eye gets close to the lens, you start seeing this starting radius, and then it comes out and we get this nice hot flame. There we go. So the only big issue that we can see now is that the focus was more on the hair here, and the actual eye, as you can see by the eyelashes, is blurry, but our fire is sharp. So we need to fix that. We can take the fast blur, or we can type in lens and get a camera lens blur and put it on our actual fire that has no blurring on it. Let's solo it, and let's solo our actual footage and start trying to match it. And this actually looks pretty good already with the blur radius of 5. So as you can see, before and after. So I'm going to keep it at 5, and I'm going to see where I first show up to this part of the frame. So I'll just bring down the quality to a quarter so I can work with it faster. So this is about where I walk in. So I'm going to keyframe the blur radius. Then I'm going to the end where I'm very blurred out, and I'm just going to push the blur radius to something like 30. So now as I'm walking closer to the camera, the fire in the eye is blurred out at first, and then it matches the blurriness when I walk in. So now I can unsolo this and see the entire picture here. And now that we have the fire ready, it's time to make the background fire. So I'm going to go into my project, and I'm going to drop in some fire footage. So I'm just going to take these 3 big fires and just throw these in. This is the footage from Video Copilot. So if you want the same footage, you should buy their pack. It is really great. So I will make a new composition. That will be 4K, because my footage is 4K. And I will drop in the fires into here. And because they're in the background, I don't care about how big I scale them, because they will be blurred out. So, and I will position it to where they look like they're coming out of the floor. And I'm just going to change the blending mode to screen on one of them, on the top layer, just so they're all blending together nicer. And now, as you can see, we have a really big wild fire going on here. So now the next step is to select both of these videos, go to Layer, Pre-Compose, and call this Big Fire. Hit Enter. Then we are going to take our footage here, bring it in. We're going to throw it on the bottom. We will hide the big fire. And we are going to start keyframing my motion of when I walk into the frame. And that will animate walking through the fire, and I will show you how. So here is the final shot of me being entered in the frame, and I will just take the pen tool and I will just start clicking. They don't even have to be any precise motion because it will be really blurry. But just get a general shape and hit to pull the mask properties and keyframe the path. Then go back a couple of frames. I'm just gonna go in big chunks. And as you can see, it is really dark, so I might have trouble with getting the precise line. And that's why there's the exposure adjustment here. And I can take it, start bringing it up, and now you can start to get all of these details here. And this is only for preview, so if you render it out, you won't see it. And basically go every couple of frames and just try to match the motion here. So as you can see, I keyframed my motion here as I'm walking through the fire. And now it's time to make it look like I'm actually walking through the fire and not just a weird sharp mask. So if we turn on the eye here for the fire, first thing we're going to need to do is choose subtract. So now you can see the fire's behind me, but the edges are very sharp. So let's go into the feather and start bringing that up. So as you can see, it's starting to come out here. But then we need to take our mask expansion and just move it slightly over. And let's find a frame when I'm actually completely in focus, so around here. And that's when we will keyframe the mask expansion and the mask feather. And then as I'm walking through the fire, we will start taking that expansion and bringing it closer, as well as feathering the fire more. So as you can see, the problem here is now this edge is coming out, which will be kind of fine because you will have aspect ratio crop. But if that's not fine, you can just bring it down more. So you can just choose the mask and you can bring it down more on those specific keyframes. So as you can see, you can just take these, just bring them down, and they don't really affect too much. So let's go ahead and continue with our keyframing. So as you can see here, I should only have this part of my head out. So let's continue with the mask expansion of bringing it in here. All the way to just my head and feathering out even more. So now you can see I'm actually walking through this fire. And then a couple more frames back. And I should be completely invisible. So just go a couple of frames. Don't forget to save your project. So the feathering is really harsh on this, so I'm just gonna bring it more to the middle on this frame. Just so when I'm walking all the way through, it doesn't look too weird. And on this keyframe, I'm just going to minimize that mask expansion as well. There we go, walking through the fire and showing up at the screen. Great, so now we can hide our footage over here, and now we can start playing with the turbulence of the fire. So let's go to where it should be a pretty good hole of where I should be, like right here. And under effects and presets, start typing in roughen edges, and just apply it to your footage. And I chose roughen color, and I just chose a pretty good red-orange mix. I had the border at 0.1, sharpness at 0.42, just so it morphs a little better. And then I was keyframing the scale. So let's have it at about 180 right now, just so you can get those really big flames. So I will keyframe the scale, and as I get to the actual frame here, I can start bringing it down, just so I get smaller edges here. And you're gonna hit U on the keyboard to see all the keyframes, and that should be pretty good. Great. So let's go into our actual comp here and find a time where I'm walking through the fire, somewhere like this, and I will take my fire comp here called comp 1, and I will put it above my footage. There we go. And now I need to really blur it out. So let's once again type in lens and get the camera lens blur. Apply it to this comp. And we're gonna hit repeat edge pixels. And we're going to blur it by 50 or so. We're gonna go really hardcore with it because look how much out of focus I am. So we need to match that look. But once again, it depends on your footage. So if your footage isn't super blurry like that, you know, then choose numbers that match your footage. And now let's start stylizing our frame to the way that we want it to look. So let's duplicate this comp and choose screen. And let's do it to the bottom one as well. That way it just overlays your footage. And on the one on the top, we're going to make the opacity 60. So now we're basically repeating the same steps that we did for the eye, where we're going to be blurring it. So let's type in fast blur, bring it here, repeat edge pixels, and start blurring it a lot, especially because it's supposed to be blurred out. So there we go. Now we're having a light bleed onto my jacket, which looks way better than before. It doesn't look like it's just placed in there. And you're going to duplicate it one more time, hit T, under opacity choose 30, and choose a much smaller number just to get really nice highlights on the actual fire. So there we go. That is the fire element. Now let's go and create some particles that will be flying around. For that we can use particular. So I'm just going to go make a new solid, call it particles, and hit save. Go into effects, trapcode, particular, and with the new designer tool, Inside Particular. It is really easy to use and come up with interesting things. They have presets in here already, so you can just go into Smoke and Fire, choose Rising Embers. We're going to hide the presets here. And as you can see, it's just one little streak here. So under the emitter type, I will choose emitter size XYZ, and I will choose XYZ individual. That way I can control it. And I will start stretching the X size. There we go. That should be fine, because I will start, I'm going to bring this a lot closer to the camera. The only things I will have to change is the motion. I will make it a lot slower. Instead of 400 under velocity, I will choose 100. For particle type, I will change the life to 7 seconds. That should be good enough. And the rest looks fine. So I will hit apply. So now I will solo the particle layer, and you can see they're really far away. So I will go to the emitter, and under position, I will start playing with the z-axis. So I will go into the negative and bring it a lot closer to the camera. And because the camera is super close up to my face, these need to be even closer because they're really small particles. That should be pretty good. And I will lower them so they can come down from the bottom. I will also take them and offset it, just so if you have particles already in the scene. And what I will also do is apply a lens blur, just to help match it more with the actual fire. So now we'll choose a mode screen, and let's unsolo it and see what we have here. So I think this is too many particles here, so I will go under particles per second and just lower it to 40. So I think that's helping the look. Then I will go to layer, new, solid, and I'll call this big particles, and I will hit save just to save my project. I will go into effect, trapcode, and I will choose form. I'll go into the designer tab. Here once again we can just go into presets, choose bokeh, and just choose deep orange. And that's already the look you're going for, so that is perfect. I'm going to solo this layer. Under mode, choose screen. And the only thing I will change is under base form, I will change the size in the X, just so they can go off of the edges. And same thing for the Y. And that should be fine. So let's unsolo it. And there we go. We have some spheres going around, out of focus as well. The only problem now is they're still kind of sharp. So we will apply another camera lens blur effect to it. And set the blur radius to maybe 20. Because these are closer to the camera, that's where they're big. So they will be out of focus because we have a pretty shallow depth of field in this shot. So now we're getting really close to that finished look that we're going for here. So you can tell the tutorial is getting closer to the end. And now the last steps to add here are the anamorphic crop, which I'm going to do it the way everybody hates, which is just dropping in a anamorphic crop file, because in reality what you're supposed to do is crop your actual composition, but this is the way I'm doing it for the sake of the tutorial. As you can see, boom, we cropped it, and now it's time to add another solid, and this is the flare. So let's save our file once again. We're going to throw the flare under the anamorphic crop. We're going to choose the mode of screen, and we're going to go effect, video copilot, optical flares. I'll go under options, and I'm going to choose the one that I think fits really well for this project, and it's called Russian. So let's go ahead and find it. There we go. And as you can see, it's got this really nice line here, and it's bright colors. It looks like it could be coming out of a fire, while at the same time giving it the sci-fi look, because you're making some unrealistic things like fire in the eyes. So let's bring it somewhere where it wouldn't be too distracting, which is down here, because our focus is on the eyes. So you don't want to, cover up the eyes with the flares. That would just ruin the entire idea here. And I think the fire is pretty strong on the left side, so I will bring the flare over here to the left side. I will make it not as intense, maybe 40%. That looks pretty good. So next step is to animate some motion and flickering to make it look like it's coming out of the fire that is burning up behind me. So to do that, there's a flicker tab, and you can choose the speed. So I'm just going to set it to like 20 so it flickers really fast. Let's solo it just so we can see what's going on. And the amount, I'm not going to go too crazy. I'm going to choose 15. And when you're playing through, you can see it moves around and it flickers. Maybe I'll make the speed even faster, something like 30. Just so you're getting some flickery motion here. Next is animating it. So you can just go to position X and Y, and you can hold Option and click on the keyframe and type in wiggle 1,10 or 20, because this is 4K footage, and basically every second it's gonna move by 20 pixels in either direction. So I'm just gonna unsolo this layer. So now we have a flickering flare, fire in the background, embers flying around everywhere, and we've got the eye effect. Next step, which is the last step, is the color correction that we are going to apply to it. And I use Magic Bullet Looks to just apply some effects to YouTube videos and tutorials. And as you can see, there's a really bad masking job that I did here. But obviously, when you're not doing it for a tutorial, you spend more time fixing it, adjusting it, perfecting it. A lot of time goes into developing the look, just so when I'm doing the tutorial, I can run through and get everything completely right. So let's go ahead and go into Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, hit Enter, call it CC. Make sure you drop it under Anamorphic Flares, because the worst thing you could do is color correct the actual black bars, which would look super bad. So let's go ahead and type in Looks into our Effects panel, bring it onto our color correction, go into Edit, and just do a couple of slight changes. So when I'm working on the color correction, I try not to use any of the preset looks, and I usually create my own here. So let's go ahead and start putting a look together here. So the first thing I'm going to drop is the duotone, because I know I want it to be a good contrast of cold and hot. So you can just play around with the balance to get the color you're going for. So I want to keep my face pretty warm. I just want to make those shadows blue. Next, I'm going to go and take my pop here, throw it on, and I'm going to really crank it up because I want this to look like a very intense video. And as you can see, the pop just makes it look like it brings details in. So it's kind of like a sharpen without really adding too much grain and weird looking post effects to your video. Next, I'm going to take my 4-way color grade, throw it on, and add more blue to the shadows. You can really pinpoint the color you're going for. And I'm going to take my mids and just make them a lot more warm. There we go, so it looks like I'm walking through the fire. And I'm going to take my highlights and make them a lot warmer as well, but not too crazy. So as you can see, my cheek is really white here, so I'm going to take my shadows and highlights, throw them on. I'm going to bring down my shadows because I want that black to be really black. And I'm going to take my highlights and just bring them down slightly, not too crazy, just to bring in just slight details to the white. So this is a really good look in my opinion right now. The only extra step I would take is add a lens vignette. So I'm gonna just throw that on, just make it a little more wide, just to really just get the edges here. And you can see the before and after. Pretty big difference in the way that the footage looks. So I really like the way the eye looks, the fire, everything matches pretty great. So I'm just gonna hit the check mark and we're basically done with the video. So all you have to do now is just export it. And to export it, you go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue, hit under the output module, you have to click on Lossless. And if you're on a Mac, you should use QuickTime. And under format options, I usually choose Apple ProRes 4444 and hit OK. Hit OK. Choose your destination where you save it. So I'm going to save it on the SSD and call it tutorial. Export. Hit save. And then just hit render, and it's going to render out your video. So there we go. Now you learned how to create fire from scratch and apply it to your own footage inside After Effects. Hopefully you learned something new. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment down below and I'll reply to it. Also, if you're not subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon to get notified anytime I make a video. Also, I suggest you check out my Patreon page where you can donate starting from $1 to get access to lots of different perks and tiers, including early access to tutorials, project files, and exclusive behind the scenes access. So hopefully you like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.